My name is Tony Seeger, and I sort of call myself an anthropologist, ethnomusicologist, audiovisual archivist, record producer, and musician, because I do all of those. Like I think many people in our field, we do many different things. And the reason I got into ethnomusicology was that I knew that my family was being persecuted during the 1950s, and I knew that music was about more than just beauty and technique. It was also about politics and social life, and I wanted to know more about that. And the other reason I decided to go and study music rather than perform it was that my uncle Mike Seeger came through with a band he had called the New Lost City Ramblers, and they were playing in a terrible smoky bar in downtown Boston. And I had dinner with them afterwards, and they were so tired, and they were so negative about the tour, and they were so negative about the place, and I thought there's got to be something more fun than this to do with music. And I was in college at the time, and that was the decision that took me to study ethnomusicology, or to study music in the Department of Anthropology, and then go on to graduate school in anthropology, but always with the intention of working with music. I was studying folklore and social relations at Harvard as an undergraduate, and I decided I really liked the work of Victor Turner, who was an anthropologist, and he was teaching at Cornell University, and I also was introduced to a specialist in lowland South American Indians named Terence Turner, and he was also at Cornell, so I applied to Cornell. My wife and I did, and we both got fellowships there. And then they decided they'd go to Chicago the next year, and so I was part of their package. My wife came along with me, and we switched to the University of Chicago, which was a very exciting place to be. And so I hooked up with, I got to know the people in the music department a little bit, and I began to just be an anthropologist. I mean, studying anthropology, trying to figure out why I think certain things are important, how they're important, how people experience them. Victor Turner was very good on experience, the idea of communitas, a sort of direct experience of other people, and through music and dance. And he had great parties at his house. And Terence Turner had taught me lots of bawdy songs that he had learned playing rugby. Chicago was fun. I really liked graduate school, and I thought, and it doesn't matter if I drive a taxi after I'm done. It's so much fun being in graduate school. I'm having such a great time that I'll take my chances. And that's what we did, and that's where the graduate school, I went down to Indiana University in graduate school. Actually, there was a folklore society meeting here, and I came down and I met Frank Gillis, and I met Bill Ivey, who was a graduate student at the time, and I met the folklorists here, and so I visited the archive, and I learned a lot about the existence of ethnomusicology as a field to approach through anthropology, from knowing that Alan Merriam was here, and from the archive. So there was no ethnomusicology at Chicago at the time. I taught, I think, the first course in it with a professor with a doctorate, recent doctorate, Ella Zonas. And two of our students actually became professional ethnomusicologists. We had about 5 at the time. It was an undergraduate course. But there was no program in it at all for quite some time. It was a fairly conservative, classical European music department of music. Well, I think this is, after all, the 64th meeting of the Society for Ethnomusicology, and it's the 4th one in Bloomington, Indiana. The one I remember is the 25th anniversary meeting. What could that be? Many years ago. But I think it's this particular institution has played a really important role in ethnomusicology. If there are several core and originating programs in the United States that originated ethnomusicology. This one, I think, really contributed a very important archive and archiving sensibility to it. And I think it also contributed an anthropological perspective on music that is very important. That's probably why the music school still doesn't have ethnomusicology inside it. And fortunately, folklore also had ethnomusicologists in it, and it grew in folklore, which I think is wonderful. And it disappeared in anthropology after I left. I was replaced by a physical anthropologist that they thought was more urgently needed in the department. But I think it's nice to be here in Indiana, and I think it's very important to look at Indiana, partly because it is one of the few places that isn't in a music department at a music school, and therefore the diversity of possibilities in terms of what you do after you're finished, and its contribution to ethnomusicology in the world, I think, is quite important. There are probably several phases of my career. I don't know if it's a career or just a series of happenstances. but I began studying the social organization and cosmology and music of a small indigenous group in the heart of Brazil, in Mato Grosso, Brazil. And I went there because I wanted to study the relationship between cosmology, social life, and music. I knew there should be a relationship, but I wasn't sure what kind of relationship it was. And ethnomusicology had this statement. We always said music and culture are related, but I wasn't clear exactly how they were related. And it seemed to me if they are related, we should be able to find it in the sounds of the music and the performance practice of the music. And I wasn't seeing that. And so I went down there to look around for that. And I wrote my PhD and went back to Brazil and taught there for 7 years. And I was very active I was elected president of the Indigenous Rights Committee, NGO of Rio de Janeiro. I was active as a scholar, started an MA program in ethnomusicology, musicology, and music education at the Brazilian Conservatory of Music, and taught at the National Museum. But then I got a postdoc to come to Indiana University. I thought, well, I'm talking about music a lot. Maybe I should take one course at least in ethnomusicology. So I got here, and Ruth Stone was a young professor at the time, and so I took a course from Ruth Stone called Paradigms, which then she turned into a book many years later. And I took a course from Ron Smith in transcription and analysis, and I was taking a course with Alan Merriam on American Indian music, but he died before the end of the course when his plane crashed in Poland. But I thought, so then I was a bona fide ethnomusicologist, actually taking a course in the subject from fun people. I had a really good time on the postdoc because you don't have to write papers. You can just really get what you want out of the course. And 2 years later, I was up here as an anthropologist in the anthropology department. They were searching for a replacement for Alan, and the first year they couldn't find any Africanists, so they opened it to people from other parts with specializations in other parts of the world. And so I applied, and just as I accepted the job here because I wanted our children to learn English, and I'd had a good time in Brazil, but I thought it was time to move back. And the dean said, well, we have a problem. We need a new director of the Archives of Traditional Music, and the full-time director was retiring. Would you mind replacing 2 full-time people with yourself and just take over the directorship of the archive? And I said, let me think about it. And I called Ruth and Ron, and I said, look, is this a good idea or a bad idea? Because I'm not going to take it if there's any other possible way of getting a full-time archivist. And they said, no, they didn't know what was going to happen to the archive, and if I didn't take it, they were concerned. So I said, sure, I'll do both. And I came to Indiana and really switched. At that point, I stopped being a South American anthropologist so much and really began to look at the archives. Now, my chair in anthropology said, you have tenure in this department. I think the dean wants to close the archive, but don't you worry, you have a job no matter what happens. But don't get too attached to it, he said. And so I spent my time trying to figure out if we should have an archive, what it was good for, and then decided we should, and then spent a lot of time raising funds for grants to copy wax cylinders and other projects. Got it moved from the basement of one hall up into the other with the Hoagie Carmichael was part of my plan. I got Chancellor Wells to get behind it, which was once Chancellor Wells said yes. He said I have no power in this university, but I have some friends that we got put right at the top of the list of renovations and got over there. So that was my archiving phase. And the frustration of an archivist is that you have all this wonderful stuff, but you couldn't at the time anyway get people access to it. And so when the Smithsonian asked me if I would take over start Smithsonian Folkways, if I would go take over the collection of folkways that was arriving at the institution and do something with it, figure out how to make it work, I said yes. And so then that's how I became a record industry mogul. And I had to learn about the record industry. And so I did my research. I talked to lots of people. That's what we do. We're ethnomusicologists. We talk to people, and they like our questions and they answer them. So I became started Smithsonian Folkways, ran it for 12 years, and I thought, that was fun to start, but I'd like to get back to teaching, which is my real joy. So I took a job. I went back to UCLA. And the music part, I've been playing the banjo since I was 10, and still do with a family, and we have a good time. So I think that's about it. Oh, gee, they've all been highlights. Every job has been really fantastic with wonderful people. The highlights of my ethnomusicology career, I would have to say, were meeting with Stone and taking her course. The course is here. The graduate students who was here, Henry Kingsbury was here, and I think one of my first advisees here, picking up after Ellen had died. And there's just a lot of really wonderful people all along the way, and it's just been a blast. This is a very complicated world we live in, and so there are lots of different parts of it. So why is ethnomusicology important in the world? Why is ethnomusicology important in different parts of the world? I think has a slightly different answer. Why is ethnomusicology important in music departments? It's because the world isn't all European and it's not all playing classical music. A lot of it is, but a lot of it has other kinds of music going on. It's important if you're going to study music and sound, if you're going to be a composer, if you're going to even just be an educated person, you really need to know more about the rest of the sounds of the world besides what's here in Indiana. I mean, Indiana was started to bring European classical music to the backwoods of Indiana, probably, but now it's important to have other voices, other sounds, and as people move to this country, I think ethnomusicology has become one of the ways to recognize the diversity of this country in a positive way rather than a negative way. That we can't solve the problems of this country, we can't solve racism, we can't solve the poverty of people trying to get into the country who were mistreated, but we can at least say their culture is as important as ours is, and their music is beautiful. Listen to it, and maybe we should think differently about them. That's one of the things that we can do. In terms of the record industry, of course, there are a lot of ethnomusicologists who go out and work in the music business. Some of them some of them do radio shows. Other people go to run record companies. Dan Sheehy was my successor. He's also a UCLA PhD, and other people from UCLA and here have worked at Folkways. So I think there are a lot of really interesting applied ethnomusicology projects to do. The one problem with them is that they're all burnout jobs. They're really hard to do. They take a lot of energy, and you don't have a permanent contract. So that once your temporary job is over, then you have 5 minutes before you have to start the next one if you're going to pay the rent. So I think we don't have a particularly good structure for public sector ethnomusicology, except for in a few cases where they might be part of a state arts council or something like that. But I think one of the disadvantages of applied ethnomusicology is the tenuousness of the contracts, unless you're at a university and have a contract for teaching. And another problem is that we can't bring the applied ethnomusicologists to our meetings very often because they're all busy and they don't have a travel budget. And so I think we need to hear more from them about how we could train better, or how we could be more engaged in what we do successfully and not just for our own enjoyment at the university. So I think we need to think more about how we can do a better job of becoming more meaningful and important in the United States and ultimately in the world.